Mike Ehrmantraut never panics. A body needs moving. A witness needs silencing. A grandchild needs protecting. His face does the same thing every time. Nothing. People watch that and call it discipline. The mark of a man who's seen too much to flinch anymore. Here's the thing about discipline, though. It's something you choose, which means it's something you get to stop choosing. Mike doesn't stop. Not once. Not ever, really. And that should bother us more than it does. Because what if that calm isn't restraint at all? What if underneath the steady hands is a man who genuinely doesn't know how to exist without a problem in front of him? What if the thing everyone mistook for strength was actually the opposite? Watch Mike when nobody's giving him a job to do. He's at the bar, alone, a beer going flat because he forgot about it 20 minutes ago. He's out back with his bonsai trees, pruning with the same surgical patience he'd bring to a stakeout. He's driving his granddaughter to the park, and his eyes are still doing laps around the parking lot. Old habit. Except it's not really a habit anymore, is it? Habits fade. This hasn't. Here's what's strange. Mike doesn't rest. He idles. And idling looks nothing like peace on him. It looks like a man in a waiting room, sitting there rigid until the next assignment finally walks through the door and lets him breathe again. Take away the job entirely and see what happens. He'll invent one. Recheck a perimeter that was already clean. Run numbers that already added up the first time. For most people, structure is something you pick up when you need it. For Mike, it's something he reaches for the instant his hands go still. But watch what he's actually doing in that instant. It's not that he's bored. Boredom passes. This doesn't pass. It gets managed immediately like a threat, which means the empty moment itself is the thing he can't tolerate, not the lack of a task, the lack of a wall. Structure isn't something Mike uses to get things done. It's something he uses to keep something else from getting in. So maybe he just loves the work. That's the easy answer. Old habits die hard, especially for guys with his background. The training doesn't switch off just because the uniform did, except that story falls apart the second you look closer. This isn't a man who stumbled into a career he happened to be great at. This is a man walking again and again into rooms that end in blood, into deals he already knows are stacked against him, into a business that's already taken almost everything from him once. If this were really about the satisfaction of a job well done, Mike would have walked away by now. He's sharp enough to see every exit, and eventually he's rich enough to take one. This isn't discipline anymore. Discipline has an off switch, this doesn't. So if it's not the work itself keeping him in that car, in that garage, on that job, what is he actually chasing? Watch what happens the moment an emotion shows up near Mike. It doesn't get felt, it gets processed, like paperwork crossing a desk. Someone panics in front of him. Jesse, Walt, some courier who's about 2 seconds from falling apart. Mike doesn't offer them comfort. He offers them a sequence. Get in the car. Don't touch anything. Here's what you say if someone asks. The panic isn't soothed, it's managed, the same way you'd manage a busted pipe. Contain it. Route it somewhere useful. Move on. Someone grieves in front of him, and what does Mike hand them? A plan. Not a shoulder, a plan. And when his own guilt shows up, which it does more often than people give him credit for, he doesn't sit with that either. He turns it into a job, another favor to settle, another debt he can work off with his hands instead of feel with anything else. Follow that pattern all the way through and it gets uncomfortable fast. Grief turns into logistics, fear turns into a checklist, guilt turns into a task with his name attached to it. Here's the part that's easy to miss, though. A procedure doesn't just organize the mess an emotion leaves behind. It reaches him first. That's the mechanism. Mike isn't cleaning up after the feeling. He's cutting it off at the pass, replacing it with a task before it ever fully lands. Watch the timing closely enough and you'll see it. The checklist is already running before his face has time to react to anything, which means the procedure was never in service of the problem. The problem was just the excuse the procedure needed to show up on time. This is where almost everyone gets Mike wrong. They see a man too hard to break and call it strength. But real strength doesn't require a conversion process. A genuinely stoic man still feels the thing, but he just doesn't perform it for an audience. That's not what's happening here. Mike is intercepting the emotion before it even lands, swapping in a procedure so seamlessly you'd almost believe he doesn't notice the substitution. Almost. He notices. That's not composure. That's avoidance. Dressed up and doing a very convincing impression of competence. So convincing it fooled almost every person in his life who called it strength. And that's the part worth sitting with, because a defense mechanism this fast, this seamless, wasn't built for ordinary emotions. Panic, guilt, grief in other people. Those are manageable feelings, and most people manage them just fine without an entire operating procedure standing guard. Something this well-engineered was built for one specific feeling, one Mike never lets anywhere near the surface. What is it actually protecting him from? There's exactly one loss Mike never manages to turn into a procedure. He's tried. He can't. Maddie. Everything else in this man's life gets filed, handled, closed out. Not this one. This is the wound that never got converted into a task, and that's precisely why it's the key to everything else. Before Maddie died, Mike was a cop who bent rules he could still justify to himself in the mirror. Then Maddie died. His son. The son he'd pulled into corruption. The death he carries real responsibility for. And something in Mike didn't just break, it rerouted. Like a river forced around an obstacle it can't move through. Because here's the part that's easy to skip past too quickly. Mike could not survive feeling that loss head on. So he didn't. He built, brick by brick, an entire operating system whose only real function was making sure he'd never again have to stand that close to something that big. Every checklist that came after, every single one, traces back to that one moment he couldn't protect the person who mattered most. And now go back. Go back to the bar, the bonsai trees, the empty parking lot he scans out of habit. Go back to the checklist he hands a grieving man instead of comfort, arriving before his own face even has time to react. None of that was ever about competence, or work ethic, or professionalism. That was the machine, running exactly as designed, doing exactly what it was built to do the day Mike buried his son and made a silent decision never to feel anything that size again. Mike built this system. He understands its wiring better than anyone alive, including himself on his best day. So if Mike already understands exactly what he's doing to himself, why hasn't he dismantled it? Here's what separates Mike from almost everyone else in this world. He's not in denial, not for 1 second. Walt lies to himself for 6 straight seasons and mostly believes it. Jesse drowns whatever self-awareness he has in the nearest available distraction. Mike does neither. He almost never pretends he's innocent. When he talks about Maddie, about corruption, about the game, there's very little self-deception left. He knows exactly what kind of man he's become, and exactly which choices brought him there. That's what makes Mike different. The truth was never hidden from him. It just never gave him anywhere to go. You'd think that kind of clarity would be the way out. It isn't. And here's the mechanical reason why, not the emotional one. Naming a coping mechanism only dismantles it if there's a self underneath, still intact, waiting to be handed back control. That's how it works for most people. You spot the avoidance, and underneath it you find the person the avoidance was covering for. But run that same operation on Mike, and there's nothing to hand control back to. The self that existed before the machine died with Maddie. What's left is not a man wearing a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism that learned to wear a man. That's why insight changes nothing. Mike doesn't lack self-awareness. He lacks a self that's separate from the system doing the coping. By now, every calm decision passes through the same machinery first. You can watch it happen every time a crisis appears. Before anyone else has even decided how to feel, Mike has already decided what needs to be done. Every time Mike says calmly, "Here's what we're going to do," that's not a man solving a problem. That's the machine taking the wheel, the way it always does, the way it's done since before most of the people in the room were even a factor in his life. So Mike keeps working, not because he hasn't figured it out. He figured it out a long time ago. He keeps working because the machine doesn't require his belief to keep running. It only requires his hands. Which means the next question isn't really about Mike's choices anymore. It's about what happens when even the machine runs out of fuel. If work is the only thing holding him together, what happens the day there's nothing left to fix? By the time Mike is sitting at that river, the job is already gone. Nothing left to solve. No checklist that applies here. No procedure standing between him and whatever's been waiting underneath this entire time. And here's the realization the whole video has been quietly withholding. It isn't that Mike was avoiding grief this entire time. Grief was never actually the threat. Grief passes eventually, even the worst of it. What Mike was really protecting, job after job, year after year, was the machine's right to keep existing. Every new task wasn't evidence he was still running from Maddie. It was evidence the system still had a reason to be there. The job stopped being the coping mechanism a long time ago. It became the alibi, proof that the coping mechanism was still necessary. Push on that one more inch, and it gets worse. Mike doesn't take the next job because it protects him from grief anymore. He takes it because taking it is the only proof he has that he's still the kind of man who needs one. The coping mechanism stopped protecting Mike from anything a long time ago. By the end, it's not protecting him at all. It's protecting itself. That's a very different man than the one this video opened on, because it means the thing sitting by that river isn't grief finally catching up to Mike. It's the machine, for the first time in decades, unable to produce a reason to keep running, and Mike has no idea what he is without a reason. Not the DEA, not Gus, not the cartel or Walt or any of the men who spent years trying to put a bullet in him. None of them were ever the real threat. The real threat was always a Tuesday with nothing on the schedule. Stillness. That's the thing he was running from. Except now we know it was never really about the pain waiting inside the stillness. It was about what stillness would prove. That the machine had run out of alibis and there was nothing underneath it to introduce. Which means the real tragedy was never that Mike Ehrmantraut died by that river. The tragedy is that he was never actually off duty. Not once. Long before he ever got there. That calm everyone admired, the steady hands, the unreadable face, the man who never seemed to panic, was never strength. It was never peace either. It was a machine that had forgotten how to switch itself off. Mike didn't spend his life doing the job. He spent his life becoming it.